This morning we will be working out of the book of Isaiah, the 40th chapter. If you brought a Bible, if you want to turn to that, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Isaiah was one of the greatest of the Hebrew prophets. He was bold, he was sincere, and he did not hesitate to personally confront a wicked king or to proclaim truths that he knew would be very unwelcome. Isaiah was not a people pleaser. He did not mind condemning the sins of kings or priests or any other person that he knew God was speaking word to. But although Isaiah was known to be very stern and uncompromising, he showed a very tender heart as well. He did not just speak of judgment. Isaiah also spoke of comfort and God bringing comfort to his people. And he clearly distinguished between God's love for the sinner but also his hatred for sin. And so we find that illustrated quite often through the writings of Isaiah. I know that's a point that we talk about a lot as a church, and that's a biblical stance, but we do read about that very thing being seen through the life and ministry and writing of Isaiah the prophet. Very little is known about his ancestry, but apparently he was born in Jerusalem, and he lived throughout his years of public ministry in that city itself. His name means the Lord saves. The Lord saves. He prophesied during the reigns of three of these kings, of Israel, the king Uzziah, and the king Ahaz. Perhaps those are names that you remember from reading in the Old Testament. But he was also working during the reigns of the kings of Judah, Jotham and Hezekiah. And he was a contemporary of the prophets Hosea, Nahum, and Micah. So it just kind of gives you a little bit of some background about him as a person. Isaiah has been called the evangelical prophet, and his book is sometimes referred to as the fifth gospel. It's quoted more frequently in the New Testament than any other Old Testament book except for Psalms. Quotations in the New Testament are made from 47 of the 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah. So we know that his prophecies and the things that God gave him to talk about as far as things that would happen in the future, 47 of his chapters, there are quotations that are lifted and used in the teaching of the New Testament church. We know that Jesus held in his hands a copy of Isaiah when he was speaking in the Nazareth synagogue, his hometown, and we know that he read aloud from that particular copy of Isaiah. In Isaiah, we read about the prophecies of Jesus' virgin birth, of his ministry of helpfulness and healing, of the general dimensions of his ministry, and of a future time when there would be no sun or moon, but the Lord himself would be the light for his people. In Isaiah 53 was such a vital part of reading by the Ethiopian eunuch that we read about in Acts chapter 8. It was him reading from this book that stirred questions that Philip the evangelist was led to come and join himself to that chariot, and from that very passage led this man to Jesus Christ. It's not an exaggeration to say that the greatest manuscript discovery in modern times was the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls by a Bedouin shepherd in 1947. In the 71 years since then, more manuscripts and fragments have been found in this area, but nothing has turned up which can compare with the complete Isaiah scroll that was discovered in those caves. This copy of what is the second longest book in the Old Testament except Psalms is well over 2,000 years old. It is the oldest complete biblical manuscript in existence. The scroll itself is 24 feet long, and it is displayed under protective glass at the shrine of the book found in Jerusalem. Isaiah's ministry began 200 years after Solomon's great kingdom had been divided into two parts. The northern kingdom, which was referred to after that as Israel. The southern kingdom, which after that was referred to as Judah. His ministry, Isaiah, began 200 years after the split of that one nation into two. And Isaiah brought God's messages primarily to Judah, the southern part of divided Israel. And his ministry continued for about 40 years. And about in the middle of those 40 years, the northern kingdom was defeated and scattered by the Assyrians, who came in and routed their land, took their people and moved them in different places throughout the kingdom. The Assyrians also came down and invaded Judah at that particular time, but God in a tremendous way turned them away from the land of Judah. For the kingdom of Judah after that, the danger of Assyria had passed, but there was worse to come. Sin would continue to grow in Judah as they continued to turn away from God and not listen to the messages to come back to God. And eventually in judgment, God would allow the Babylonians to come in and to capture the nation. And this would occur about 100 years later. And so their sin just continued, got worse and worse. Eventually God brought judgment upon that land through the Babylonians. But Isaiah presents a call for God's people to turn away from sin and to return to Him. And that is a great message that we find throughout this amazing book. God knew that it would be very difficult for people who had forgotten God, who had never known God, or had drawn their own inaccurate conclusions about Him over time. He knew it would be difficult for those people to turn from sin and to turn to Him. In the depths of their brokenness, they didn't even recognize the darkness that they were living within. And their lives were nothing but struggles with no hope of anything ever being any better. It was into this reality, this ongoing of sin, the growth of sin, the refusal to turn to God, that Isaiah writes his book. And in today's text, he shares what is commonly known as the key text in the book of Isaiah. In this particular text is the focus of our message today. Isaiah wanted them to grasp the stark difference between a person who lived within God's circle of obedience and those who chose to live and ignore God's way. He wanted them to understand the difference of what life would look like if you live within God's circle of blessing or if you choose not to follow God at all, if you reject Him. And he wanted very much for them to be able to see that. And certainly we realize that today that same element of truth is still there. That God is still calling us to be a people who live within His circle of obedience. That we realize His blessings because we are obeying and trusting Him. But to realize if we do not, if we choose to follow our own ways, that we will not reap those blessings. In fact, there are warnings that we need to heed and to turn away from those things. One of the more familiar verses in the book of Isaiah comes from this 40th chapter. And here Isaiah is explaining the blessing of God to people who turn to Him. In Isaiah chapter 40, beginning in verse 28, Isaiah wrote, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and His understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." God offers 3 levels of blessings to people who choose to follow Him. And they come at different times in your life and mine, and each one is a blessing when it arrives in its own way. And we want to kind of briefly talk about these three different levels of blessings and that are there for people who choose to live within God's circle of blessing. You see them on your back of your bulletin. You also see them on the screen this morning as we talk about them. But first of all, staying within God's circle of blessing means some will soar. Some will soar. Isaiah is saying that sometimes God takes people who live within his circle of blessing and enables them to soar on the wings of an eagle. It's those moments in your life that are very distinctive from the normal flow of life, the normal routines of life. It's one of those times that you probably never forget. It's one of those times when excitement fills your life and you realize you are not in a normal flow of life. You sense an ability to soar. In other words, there is a high emotionally, or there is a high spiritually for you that is a blessing from God. The Hebrew word for soar here is the same root word used for the name of God when he is referred to as God Most High. It's when God takes you to spiritual and emotional heights that change you as a person. Today, if you follow God, and a number of you do here today, and you think about it, he has probably given you some moments of soaring on the wings like an eagle. Maybe it was the day that you gave your life to Jesus. That's a day I'll never forget. I'll never forget how I felt that day. It was a neat experience. I'll never forget the day my kids came to Christ. And what a great moment that was to personally immerse them into Jesus Christ, that they had come in faith to receive his gift of grace. Maybe it's your wedding day. Just the excitement of that and the vows and coming together and what a moment that was. Or maybe it's the birth of a child. You know, so many have been through that experience, and many of you have had children, and you understand the joy and just that moment and what you feel at that particular time. Maybe it was just an emotional high for you. Or getting a job that you've always wanted, or overcoming a very serious illness that maybe you felt was a death sentence, and you had found healing in the midst of that, and there was such a feeling of release, and maybe that was a high moment for you. Or you found a church family you loved, or you experienced a season of your life when you felt particularly close to God, and your Bible reading and your worship and everything just felt a sharpness to it and a closeness to God, and you wanted to hang on to that time every day of your life. Or maybe it was a special moment on a mission trip when something happened to you and your life was not the same. Or connecting to a ministry that just really suited your gifts and your personality, and you found such fulfillment in doing this simple task for God. You know, I don't know what it is for you, but you have your list, I would think, where you had some times like this. And if you've been living an obedient life to God for a number of years, I know you've had some times. And there are times you're not the same person after that. And these are moments of soaring that God has given you from time to time in your life. You have entered that season, and I think it's important not to make the mistake of simply calling this good period in your life a stroke of good luck, or things just worked out that way. You know, we need to give God the credit he deserves when we enter times like that. We need to see the presence of God and the power of God blessing your life because you have chosen to live within his circle of blessing. But it's important to realize no one soars all the time. I've had those times. And I'd love for them to last every day of my life, but you know they don't. But during that time, savor the moment. Thank God for the moment. Give Him glory. Thank Him. And don't be sad that it doesn't last for the rest of your days, but enjoy that time. Because it's not going to last, but it's there for a purpose. Secondly, staying within God's circle of blessing means some will run. Some will run. Another blessing God grants to people who follow Him is the ability to run without growing weary. As you probably realize, we're not talking about the physical sense of running here. You know, I don't know, as I look out over our group today, myself included, that I feel like going out and running a marathon today. You know, I'm not prepared for that. I would make it. You know, I don't know, too many of us would probably make it out of the parking lot today, you know, if that was the case. But maybe get out of the building's a stretch, you know, for some of us. And I understand that. So we're not really talking here about God's going to just give you some physical sense and, man, you're going to be able to go out and really run like you've never run before. I mean, that's really not what we're talking about here. My grandson Arthur, who turns 4 in a couple of weeks, has a lot more energy and agility than me. When he comes over, we float between, Grandpa chase me, Grandpa chase me, you know. And, you know, we do that for a while. He wants to go in circles, you know, grab his hands and spinning. And for some reason, he never gets as dizzy as I do. I just don't really understand that. Or he wants to play fight. And, you know, thankfully he doesn't hurt me, but I have to warn him when he gets close. But, you know, I always run out of energy well before he does, you know. I remember having more energy when my kids were small, but the grandparent stage, it's be smart, be smart. I keep telling myself that. But when you age, you know, things just don't come as easily. You get tired quicker. Your abilities are not the same, and wisdom helps you to accept those kinds of things as well as reality. We get tired quicker. Need a little more rest. But the running in these Bible verses that is being talked about here isn't the physical activity of running. It's talking about those seasons of busy activity when responsibilities are greater than the hours in a day or the levels of energy in your body. You know, we pack such busy schedules today, don't we? There's so many things we want to do, so many responsibilities we feel like maybe we want to do but have to do, people we want to see. You know, there's just a lot to do today. I heard about a guy that was driving down the road following some kind of a delivery truck. And he noticed that about every half mile, this guy was stopping, getting out of his truck cab with a baseball bat. And he was beating on the side of his truck. And then he'd go get back in the truck and drive another half mile and then get out and do the same thing. Well, the guy that was behind him thought about passing him. You know, you kind of think, well, this person, I can't, wait for this kind of nonsense. But he was so curious. And he kept following and watching, and it kept happening over and over and over again. And finally, curiosity just overwhelmed him. And so he pulls up next to this guy when he gets out the next time, and he says, it's probably none of my business to ask you this, but what in the world are you doing? And the guy said, well, I've got this half-ton truck, and I'm hauling a ton of chickens. And at any given moment, half of them have to be flying. Yeah, it kind of dawns on you a little bit slow, but anyway, I understand. But you ever have those moments you feel like you just don't get to roost long enough? Something's always hitting the side of your van and you're up flying, because you can't seem to find that peace and contented time of roosting that you'd like to have. And certainly if that is your situation, I think it probably is for a lot of you. But you're probably interested in what this passage is talking about here, this particular phrase. I think there's an important clarification to make about this blessing of energetic activity. It's certainly not God's stamp of approval on our overly busy lives. You know, most of us are really too busy. When you stop and think about it, we're involved in way too many things, and we work too hard at our jobs. We drive our kids, taxi them around to too many activities, and we try very hard to crunch too much into every day that God gives us. And I think God would probably look at a lot of our lives and tell us we probably need to drop a few things and do a few things well instead of a lot of things halfway. But this blessing of energetic activity from God is instead granted toward, again, being obedient to Him, staying within His circle of blessing. And when we do, I firmly believe this passage is talking about the fact that we're granted persevering energy. When we're living those kinds of lives and we're running through the flow of our lives, we're looking for areas to minister, we're serving Him with integrity, we're trying to obey Him, that God grants us more energy than we probably realize we have. I don't know about you, I've run across things and I thought, I don't have any energy to do this at all. But it was something for God, it was something that was important, it was something that was obedience to Him, and I did it anyway, and God provided enough energy to get that done. So I think there's some perseverance in serving God and obeying Him that we would not have otherwise. You know, the Bible's full of people who use their lives to serve God's kingdom, and they serve with great zeal, energy. You know, I've read, like you, the life of Jesus from the Gospels, and I continue to sit back and look at His schedule and think, how in the world did He ever make it to accomplish what He accomplished? You know, there wasn't enough rest. I mean, you see that reading about Jesus in the Gospels. I mean, humanly speaking, He did probably more than you would anticipate a man being able to do. But I think God blessed Him with perseverance and ability to endure and to accomplish what God wanted Him to accomplish. You, like me, can read through the book of Acts and some of Paul's letters and sit back and think, how did Paul ever have the energy to do all that Paul did? I mean, you think of all the traveling and the way they traveled in those days and trying to take care of yourself and the group that you're with and teaching and preaching and trying to start churches, and you think of the persecution that Paul endured and times he was left for dead and times he was shipwrecked, and you just start reading through these things about his life and you think, how in the world was he ever able to do these things? But I think God granted him with some persevering ability to run, serve, not physically run, but to do what needed to be done. I look at the early church. I see a lot of perseverance in that early church. And it was simply people who loved what God brought into their lives, and they simply shared it. And they took on ministries and led them, and they extended mercy to other people. And you see some persevering and some zeal because there was obedience to God. And I think God honors that in our service to Him. So sometimes God blesses you with a season of soaring where His power and presence visit your life and you have that mountaintop moment. And other times it's the energy of ministry activity that you enjoy and you are gifted to do for Him, and where you serve Him and you serve His people, and it's a very fulfilling thing for you. But there's one more level of God's blessing that's mentioned here. And the third point is staying within God's circle of blessing means some will walk. Some will walk. Sometimes God just helps you to walk and not faint. It's the idea of someone barely making headway. Never really able to move out of first gear. And there will be seasons in your life when you cannot soar. And it will seem like the power and the presence of God may be 1,000,000 miles away from you. There'll be seasons when the energetic running of ministry activity is impossible for you. And you'll feel your losses, and you'll find no energy to do much of anything. And in those moments, as someone who is living within God's circle of blessing, when all you can do is walk, but God makes sure you don't faint. You make it through. You survive. I've enjoyed reading this week again. I've read the story before of Dr. John Claypool, who was the minister of the Crescent Hill Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky from 1966 to 1971. His daughter Laura Lou, was found to be struggling with acute leukemia. And after 2 years of struggle and hospital stays and treatments, she died at the age of 10. It was a very, very difficult period, as you can imagine, for this family. She asked a lot of very probing questions that he, as a father, struggled to answer. And it was a very, very difficult experience, as you can imagine. The week following his daughter's death, John Claypool preached using Isaiah 40:31 as his text. And he suggested in his message that Isaiah introduces us to three very different emotional experiences in life. Sometimes we're on top of the world, we can soar with the eagles. Most of the time, however, life is routine and we run without getting weary. But there are those difficult experiences, he said, when it's all we can do to walk and not faint. We just barely hold on to our faith and our hope. And Dr. Claypool told the congregation, and I quote, he said, "I'd like to be able to say, following my daughter's death, that my faith is so strong that I'm soaring like an eagle. The truth is, I'm really weary, and I can barely walk without fainting." You know, our hearts reach out to this family and the suffering that they endured during this particular time that marked them for the rest of their lives. Dr. John Claypool moved on from that ministry after 1971, served in several churches after that. He died in 2005. But what a story of how this passage so vividly describes a very, very difficult season in life. But you know, once a difficult season ends, and it ends in a sense that's different for each of us, and sometimes it feels like it never ends. But you'll find that the ability to walk and not faint is a blessing just as meaningful as soaring like an eagle and running without weariness. Because God's presence in those difficult times can be just as powerful, just as moving, just as blessed. We are blessed as if we were soaring like an eagle. The last level of God's blessing is a frequent experience in life, and Jesus met it head on. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." This passage isn't about soaring like an eagle or running with the legs of youth, but it does tell us that Jesus is there for us in life's toughest times. He can help comfort in ways we can't imagine. He can help carry weariness when we don't have the strength to carry it ourselves. He is always there, ready to help. And we come to know and appreciate him all the more when we live our lives within his circle of obedience and circle of blessing. When those spiritual and emotional mountaintop experiences come, savor them and thank God for them, but realize they will not last. When you get involved in a ministry that matches your desire and giftedness, enjoy the extra energy and passion that they stimulate in you. And when life seems to be falling apart, put your hope in the Lord. He'll help you to walk without fainting. And God may use your struggles not only to draw you closer to Him, but also to encourage others who are struggling, that you might be a testimony to God's power working in a life. Would you pray with me today? We thank you, Father, for the faithful ministry of Isaiah, for how powerfully he wrote. Certainly your words of warning to those who were seeking to live their lives away from you, but also, Father, to speak of the comfort and the help that can be brought to those who live within your circle of blessing. And Father, we realize today that we have all probably experienced these seasons. But how much better they were able to be endured, we can say we did so as your child and living within your circle of blessing. But that call for those who are not is to come and live their lives within that circle. And in those moments of soaring and running without weariness, and walking and not fainting, become more of a testimony to your ability to minister to us in whatever life situation we are. Thank you so much for not only ministering to us, but for giving us a ministry to share with others. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I kind of wondered when I was working on this message this week, maybe you're in one of these seasons yourself. Maybe as you sit there today, you think that's me. I'm right there. Or maybe right now you're just thinking of times you were in one of these places. And it's so important to realize that we need to continue reaching back to God, who has reached out, as Kelsey talked about, his pursuit of us, to receive, to reach out to him and to receive what he has for us. That he offers us new life, a relationship with Jesus Christ. That he offers that and tells us in the New Testament what we need to do to be a recipient of this very gift of grace. Forgiveness of sins, the dwelling of the Holy Spirit, certainly comes through belief. It comes through confession of our obedience to him. It comes through repenting of a way of life that walks away from him and walking toward him. A life commitment that's revealed in our baptism and the receiving of very precious gifts, living very faithful before him. And certainly if any of you would like to speak to me about receiving Christ today, I'd be more than happy to speak to you. Anyone at the back tables today would be more than happy to share with you as well. If you're looking for a church family, you wonder what's it mean to become a part of Kenwood Heights. Again, I'd love to speak to you today, or anyone at one of the back tables, what that's about. But maybe today you're just burdened. Maybe today you need just to share with someone and have someone pray with you. We're more than happy to do that as well today. We just ask that you would come and share with one of us today as you feel led by the Lord today, as we stand together and as we sing.